2020 started the world crisis. In 2021, we battled a pandemic. 2022 was the start of a geopolitical chess game with global consequences. Let's find out what the world has to face in 2023, the next crisis year. In this video, we talk about the future of the Ukraine war, the economic collapse we witness, dissect all crises we face right now, and important events that could, and probably will, change the course of our future. If you thought 2022 was bad, you should brace for impact. Welcome to Dark New World. The last 3 years were a wild ride. So many changes, so many events that triggered crises, wars, famines, and other consequences we cannot even imagine right now. The world feels like everything is upside down. 2023 will be another crisis year. In this year, we will see global changes, the consequences of the Ukraine war all over the world, important elections, and even the danger of the start of possible conflicts. At the moment, the world has not yet fully recovered from the COVID pandemic. The pandemic highlighted the weaknesses in our fragile just-in-time delivery system, a system that is only working when everything is happening as expected. It is a system that doesn't allow for any disruptions. But now, the world struggles with the COVID fallout and the war in Europe. The world economy is sliding into a crisis, global, interconnected, and with no solution at the horizon. The global economy is now expected to grow by 2.7%, 0.2 percentage points lower than previously expected. While increased energy prices were the major problem for the Eurozone, outbreaks of the COVID-19 pandemic in China have become a persistent cause of supply chain problems. China's growth is forecast to accelerate to 4.4% next year, meager by Chinese standards, and 0.2% down on July's outlook. Although the United States labor market remains strong, job growth appears to be slowing in response to the US Federal Reserve's aggressive interest rates increases. The IMF slashed its outlook for growth in the United States from 2.3 to 1.6% this year. It expects only tepid growth of 1% in 2023. The world economy has run into multiple obstacles, with the war in Ukraine driving up food and energy prices already elevated by the COVID pandemic. Soaring inflation and rising interest rates also threaten to reverberate. So the economic crisis that the world is in right now is our background. It links, sometimes triggers, and sometimes amplifies crises that seem to have nothing to do with the financial markets and the economy. Whatever happens in a country, a bad economic situation will strengthen the observable effects. For example, next year, there will be parliamentary and presidential elections in Turkey. The country has regional ambitions, and it has disputes with almost all its neighbors, especially Greece. The dispute about militarization of islands right off the Turkish coast were in the headlines for weeks. But also its role in the Ukraine conflict, as a mediator between Ukraine and Russia. The economic situation in Turkey is not looking good. A record-breaking 85% inflation is making life for ordinary Turks increasingly difficult. But with the upcoming elections, we will see protests and more than heated debates in Turkey. After the failed coup attempt in 2016, everything is possible. In this case, the economic situation can make a normal process like an election a dangerous event. President Erdogan will face more resistance than ever in the next year's election, and outside players will try to interfere in the country. But Turkey is not the only country that faces a recession and high inflation. Even in Europe, things are not looking good. The war in Ukraine will not be solved overnight, and prices are rising with no end in sight. The problem is that many people don't understand that the price increases were only the beginning, and that inflation could stay for years. In that case, many won't be able to maintain their standard of living. Especially income-weaker households will struggle more and more with the situation. And next year, the European economy will take a direct hit from the war in Ukraine. With a lack of Russian gas, producers will have to increase prices for almost everything. The consequence is that from bread, to cars, to housing, everything will cost you a fortune in Europe. And that will take people to the streets. As for the war in Ukraine, it will reach its next phase. The fact that the Russians are starting to target Ukrainian civil infrastructure is an indicator that the war reached a new level. Moscow will do everything it can to achieve its goals. We maybe see a new offensive on Kiev with the help of Belarusian forces in the north. And finally, there is the danger of the use of weapons of mass destruction. The world is looking at this conflict in fear. But personally, I doubt that there will be any final conclusions to this war next year. But after a year of fighting, the rest of the world will start to feel the consequences, especially the third world. Food importing countries will have to face gigantic price increases. or in some cases, famine. Sharp reductions in export volumes in 2022 are the result of ongoing fighting in regions with Black Sea ports. Alternative routes via land are slower and due to constant shelling dangerous. On land, wheat and corn supplies attempting to exit Ukraine via the rail network or on truck transport will have to face logistical bottlenecks. In total, Ukrainian exports have dropped by 15 to 19 million metric tons by sea. And on the Russian side, export volumes have dropped by 2 to 3 million metric tons. The limited food supply is an important factor for the price increases in the global food sector. The high food prices will undoubtedly affect all countries, but some are more capable of managing the food shortages and price shocks than others. For example, countries to look out for in 2023 are Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Somalia and Yemen. These countries rely on grain imports, have limited stock and low purchasing power. There is a high probability that we will see humanitarian crises show up all over the globe, paired with riots and danger of armed conflict in poor regions. The war in Ukraine won't be the only conflict next year. And these conflicts will make it harder and harder to track and aid in these situations. Institutions like the United Nations will have their hand full and will probably call for help. At the same time, the political situation in the West, paired with inflation, will lead to less coverage of these events, as Europe and the US are busy with internal affairs and the war in Ukraine. And on a global political scale, many countries are turning away from the open global markets and the current world order. Over the past 2 decades, there has been an astonishing restructuring of global economic power. This has been driven primarily by the rise of China and, to lesser extent, the BRICS countries, more broadly, with addition to the East Asian giants, encompass Brazil, Russia, India and South Africa. As this group has become increasingly formalized and institutionalized, hosting regular summits and establishing collective bodies, many observers have worried that its growing influence might be accompanied by the normalization of authoritarian forms of state capitalism and even the unraveling of the liberal order. Others have taken a more sanguine view, arguing that Eastern forms of state-led development appear superior in many ways to Anglo-American economic and political structures. And this is reconcilable with, and indeed depends on, an open global economy. Either way, the concerns of many Western liberals have resurfaced following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Recent news that other mostly non-democratic states, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia or even NATO member Turkey, have either applied to join the BRICS or are considering doing so, is also cause for concern among Western governments. It looks like Asia and the West are departing from each other. Economically, to some extent, but more on a political level. The Western model will be strongly under pressure under any government that wants to adapt or maintain it in East or Central Asia. And as the West itself is struggling with the world situation, many will turn to more authoritarian forms of government. Global freedom faces a dire threat. Around the world, the enemies of liberal democracy, a form of self-government in which human rights are recognized and every individual is entitled to equal treatment under law, in theory, are accelerating their attacks. Authoritarian regimes have become more effective at co-opting or circumventing the norms and institutions meant to support basic liberties and at providing aid to others who wish to do the same. In countries with long-established democracies, internal forces have exploited the shortcomings in their systems, distorting national politics to promote hatred, violence and unbridled power. Those countries that have struggled in the space between democracy and authoritarianism are increasingly tilting towards the latter. The global order is nearing a tipping point, and if democracy's defenders do not work together to help guarantee freedom for all people, the authoritarian model will prevail. In the end, 2023 will be another step towards the world of the 21st century. And this world is different from the world we know. There will be many changes, and they will come fast and swift. For careful observers, next year will give us hints in which direction the world is heading for the next few decades. Many decisions from today will matter and shape the world for the coming century. Although the situation is scary, at the same time it's hard to deny that we are in one of the most interesting times in human history. It remains to be seen if the world on the other side of this everything crisis is better or worse than before. But it's not looking too good right now. If you want to see more videos like this, then consider to like and subscribe. And here we have 2 of my latest videos to continue. My name is Dennis, thank you for watching and goodbye.